The land had learned. Eli Mercer's footsteps the way a dog learns its master's mood. Quiet, steady, never hurried. For 15 years he had walked the same paths across his small patch of stubborn Arizona earth, boots, pressing familiar shapes into red soil that cracked like old skin beneath the sun. His farmhouse stood alone at the edge of nowhere, a squat rectangle of timber and stone crouched against the endless horizon. Wind scoured its walls, dust softened its corners, and silence lived inside it like a permanent tenant. There were no voices arguing or laughing within those walls, no soft breathing beside him at night. Only the groan of floorboards, the tick of cooling metal, and the steady pulse of loneliness that had become as familiar to Eli as his own heartbeat. People in the nearest town spoke of him when they thought he wasn't listening. They said he was a widower, that his wife had died young and taken the light with her. They said he preferred the company of dirt and crops to people, that he was half wild himself now. Eli didn't correct them. Talking had once been easy. Now it felt like lifting stones from a riverbed, possible, but exhausting, and rarely worth the effort. The land asked nothing of him but work, and in return it gave him purpose. That had been enough. On a dry market morning, when the sun already burned white though it was barely past dawn, Eli rode into town for seed, salt, and lamp oil. The town buzzed with a restless energy he never quite remembered until he was in the middle of. There was horses stamping, men shouting prices, women bartering over cloth and flour. He moved through it like a ghost, nodding when required, trading coins for goods, his mind already turning back toward the quiet of his fields. It was the crowd at the far end of the square that slowed him. Not the usual ring around a card game or a horse trade, but something tighter, heavier. Voices carried a sharper edge there, laughter mixed with something uglier. Eli reined in his horse and followed the sound, unease tightening his chest for reasons he could not name. A wagon stood near the stock pens, its boards scarred and sun-bleached. Beside it stood a woman, not sitting, not crouched, standing straight, shoulders back, as if refusing to shrink no matter how the world pressed in around her. An iron ring circled her wrist, a short length of chain fastened to the wagon rail. Her dark hair was bound simply, no ornaments, no attempt to soften her strength. Her face was calm in a way that spoke not of peace but of endurance. A rough sign leaned against the wheel. One word scrawled without care, Apache. Eli felt something twist low in his stomach. He'd seen Apaches before at a distance, sometimes as shadows along ridges, sometimes as bodies brought into town by soldiers who wore victory like a badge. He'd heard the stories, the lies mixed with truth, the way fear made monsters out of people. But this was different. This was a market. This was a person being measured like livestock. Men circled the wagon, muttering, joking, spitting dust. One laughed and said she was the last of her band, left behind when the rest were driven off or killed. Another shrugged and said no one wanted her, not really, not with the army watching and the risk she carried. The trader leaned against the wagon, bored, as if discussing a sack of grain that had gotten damp. The woman did not look at them. Her gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the square, beyond the town itself, as if she were already halfway gone in her mind. There was no pleading in her eyes, no fear that showed on the surface. Only watchfulness. Only a quiet strength that made Eli's throat tighten unexpectedly. For a moment he told himself to turn away. This wasn't his concern. He was a farmer, not a savior. He had learned painfully that some things could not be fixed by good intentions. He had learned what it meant to lose someone and be powerless to stop it. Yet his feet did not move. Her eyes flicked just once and met his. In that brief connection, something old and sharp cut through him. He remembered another look years ago, in a dim room that smelled of medicine and sweat, his wife's hand light in his, as she smiled at him with courage that had terrified him more than her sickness. He had not known then how to answer that look, how to promise what could not be promised. The memory burned. A voice nearby said a price, low and dismissive. No one else wants her. Eli stepped forward before he could think better of it. The dust shifted under his boots. The trader glanced at him, surprised, then assessing. Eli said nothing at first. Silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he named a sum, firm final. More than the woman was worth in the trader's eyes. Enough to stop the laughter and draw a few raised brows. The trader hesitated, then smiled. Coin spoke louder than conscience. Papers were produced. Explanations mumbled about permission and legality, about how this was all done proper now. Eli signed without really seeing the words. His hand was steady, though his pulse thudded in his ears. The chain was removed. The clink of iron sounded far too loud in the open air. Eli turned to the woman. Up close, he could see fine lines at the corners of her eyes, dust clinging to her skin, the faint mark where the iron had rested. He searched for words and found only the truth, plain and simple. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke a single word in a language he did not understand. Her voice low and steady. It did not sound like thanks. It sounded like acknowledgement. He offered her his coat against the relentless sun. She took it after a pause, not clutching it, not bowing her head, accepting it the way one accepts a ceasefire. They left the town before noon. Eli rode ahead, setting an easy pace, giving her space without meaning to. The road stretched long and empty, dust rising and settling behind them. He did not look back often, but when he did, he saw her sitting straight in the borrowed saddle, hands sure on the reins, eyes scanning the land with the focus of someone who knew both its dangers and its promises. As the town disappeared behind them, swallowed by heat and distance, Eli felt the weight of what he had done settle onto his shoulders. He did not know what lay ahead, for her or for him. He only knew that the silence he was riding back toward would not be the same, and that for the first time in years, that thought did not feel like something to fear. The farmhouse received them without ceremony. It crouched beneath the wide sky as it always had, its porch worn smooth by years of wind and sun, its windows catching the light like tired eyes. Eli dismounted first, tied the horse, then stepped aside to give her room. She took in the place slowly, the well with its frayed rope, the stack of firewood, the field stretching toward the low hills, measuring, remembering, comparing. When she slid from the saddle, her boots touched the dirt softly as if greeting it. Inside, the house smelled of soap, wood, and the faint mineral bite of the desert. Eli showed her the small room at the back, the one that had once belonged to his wife. He had kept it clean out of habit, not hope. The bed was narrow but sturdy, the quilt folded neatly. He placed a bowl of water on the table and bread beside it, then stepped away, closing the door with care. He did not know how to welcome someone into a life that had been arranged for one person only. So he chose space. Space had always been his answer. The first days passed with a cautious rhythm. Eli rose before dawn as usual, lit the lamp, and went out to check the irrigation lines. When he returned, she was already awake, sitting on the porch with the coat he had given her folded beside her. She watched the sky lighten without comment. They shared meals in silence that felt different from the silence Eli knew, less hollow, more alert, like a pause before speech rather than an ending. She followed him to the fields on the third day. She did not ask in words, but in posture and presence, matching his pace, stopping when he stopped. He handed her a tool without thinking. She took it as if it belonged there. By afternoon, she had learned the pattern of the rows, the way water liked to wander if not guided firmly. Her movements were efficient, practiced in a way that spoke of other labors, other lands. When the sun grew harsh, she tilted her head, studying the wind, and guided him to adjust the canvas shade he used for seedlings. He found himself listening. Names came later. One evening, as the light thinned and the coyotes began their distant singing, she pointed to herself and spoke. "Naya." The sound settled into the room, simple and strong. Eli answered with his own name, feeling oddly exposed, saying it aloud. She repeated it once, carefully, as if testing its weight. Nights were the hardest. Eli lay awake, listening to the house breathe, aware of another presence moving softly down the hall. Memories rose uninvited, his wife's cough, the way grief had hollowed, the space beside him until it became easier to pretend it had always been empty. Once he heard Naya wake from sleep with a sharp intake of breath. He did not go to her door. He stood in the kitchen instead, hands braced on the table, waiting until the sound of her breathing evened again. The past followed her too. One afternoon, a patrol appeared on the far ridge, their uniforms pale against the land. Naya stiffened instantly, her hand hovering near the doorframe. Eli felt the fear move through the room like a draft. Without thinking, he stepped between her and the window, his back to the glass. The soldiers passed without stopping, dust trailing behind them. The house seemed to exhale. That night, Eli took the papers from his chest where he had folded them, carefully, and placed them in the hearth. The fire caught slowly, ink curling, words blackening and disappearing. He told her haltingly, that she was not bound to him or to this place, that the land did not own her, that if she chose to leave he would not stop her and no one would follow. She listened without interruption, her face lit by the last coals. When he finished, she looked at the ashes, then at him. She shook her head, not refusal, not agreement. Just a statement of the present, not yet. Time softened the edges of everything. They worked side by side, finding a shared pace that did not require instruction. She showed him which plants eased pain, which leaves brewed into something that steadied the stomach. He showed her how to read the clouds for rain that rarely came. Words grew between them like careful bridges. Laughter surprised them both one evening when a stubborn mule tested their patience and won. Winter arrived quietly. They stacked wood until their hands ached, breath steaming in the cold. On the worst nights, the wind howled so fiercely it felt as if the house might lift and wander away. Eli made tea the way his wife had taught him, and Naya added a pinch of dried herb, nodding approval at the taste. They sat close to the fire, warmth shared without comment. One morning, Eli found her at the edge of the property, where the earth sloped toward the hills. She traced patterns in the dust with her toe, lines that echoed older paths. She spoke of people who had walked there before, of stories carried by the wind long after names were lost. Her English had grown careful and sure, practiced in quiet moments he had not noticed. "I was not left behind," she said finally, eyes on the horizon. "I am still here." The words settled deep. Eli understood then that whatever he had done in town had not defined her. It had only opened a door she would choose to walk through or not on her own terms. Respect replaced gratitude. Choice replaced debt. Spring returned, tentative but determined. They planted more than they needed. Seeds pressed into the soil with hope that felt earned rather than desperate. The farmhouse learned new sounds, footsteps that matched Eli's at dawn, a voice answering the wind instead of yielding to it. The silence remained, but it had changed. It was no longer an emptiness to be endured. It was a shared quiet, wide enough to hold two lives moving forward without chains. Without bargains, only the patient work of choosing each other and the land. One day at a time,